Salamun alaikum. My name is Zain Haider Awan, and today on our show we are very much honored to have Brother Ali Najaf from the United States of America. We are going to be discussing a variety of issues, but loosely based around the whole thematic topic of journeys. What journeys do we take in our own lives? What journeys can we learn from the past people who have been travelers of a variety of magnitudes? And at the same time, how can we as a community benefit? We are asking you to also have your input, and the way that you can do that is through engaging through our social media. And as this is not a live show, feel free to send in your questions and we can hopefully put them forward to Brother Ali later on. And in coming shows, we'll hope to address them. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullah.
How was your journey down today?
Well, it's a bit longer than expected, but as always, it's a pleasure to be here.
It's quite a shift in hours between the two.
It is. But you know what? This is the first time. This is the first time, kind of within the year that not the first time, but within the year, it's a period of the year where you have a shorter time difference. Yep. So instead of it being 5 hours, it's actually 4 hours, just because the time change hasn't happened in America yet, but it's happened here.
So you get that. Were you here when the transition happened?
So I was here when the transition happened, and obviously my family back home, everybody's just a 4 hour difference now. So at least there's a closer gap there.
How long does it take you in the flight?
So it's typically about a 7 hour flight. Yep. You sit there and watch every single movie and documentary until you try to fall asleep. But you know that's kind of how it is.
And you're quite well acquainted to the UK community, because this is, I think, your third, fourth time?
So typically I'm here with the Shabab al-Sabtain organization here. Shout out to my brothers and sisters from that organization. This year I'm at Haider Islamic Center down south, and so I am quite familiar with the UK community.
Well, SafeerTV has been broadcasting your lectures live as well, and could you just give us a bit more about what your lecture theme has been about?
Sure. So what I wanted to do for Muharram, and it's great that you ask. What I've been trying to do is to give something that's a bit different than the mainstream that's typically given. And something that's been a challenge in my life is I growing up never saw a series of lectures on philosophical concepts which exist out there today. Because I feel like there's a big gap between academia and the religious world. So you kind of see that the secular world is kind of separated. And what I wanted to do these lectures is bring in these two worlds and try to say to everyone that's out there that religion and academia are not very different, and we actually discuss a lot of issues that are similar. So what I did for the Muharram topics was I tried to bring about philosophical concepts. So we talked about moral relativism. We talked about, for example, we had different topics on the cosmological argument proving God. We're talking about the design arguments proving God. We're talking about arguments of miracles. We're talking about a lot of different arguments, philosophical themes and concepts that exist. But what I did is I kind of took those philosophical concepts, simplified them, and gave them a lecture format. So you would get the pro argument, for example, for the design argument, you would get the pro argument for the design argument. And then what I do is you'd give examples of hadith and Quranic verses which support that, and obviously live examples that the speaker sees best. And then you'd give the con argument. Many people, what they do is they'll immediately just give their side of the story and not go anywhere over that. But what I decided to do is I decided to take the arguments and give the possible cons that a person might come and argue you with. I mean, an atheist or even an untheist who's not very convinced, to give these arguments. And it's set in a very academic format so that a person can look at it and scrutinize it. This is also done for the general population. I mean, any non-Muslim can go online and type cosmological argument, and the lecture pops up and they're able to see it and it's archived there. So really the main goal was to kind of do something different, in the sense that it's the philosophical concepts that people are really having an issue with, especially in philosophy departments and a lot of these institutions.
So this element, I don't want to delve too much into it, because definitely I'm sure the viewers are benefiting and they can find it online as well. Yes. But looking at this idea of the Western academia, and then you've got Islamic knowledge, can they really and truly be consolidated without contradicting each other? Because on one side you've got Western thought, which is trying to promote a more kind of secular perspective of thinking, whereas the religion is always trying to bring you back to thinking and centralization of God within that.
Sure. Well, the way I see it is I think they can really balance themselves out. I think if you have religion without rationale, which is what philosophy is. Philosophy in general is rationalizing the thoughts that you get.
Well, it's good you say that because there's a lot of confusion, especially in the Shia community. Whenever we had this term philosophy, everyone kind of we don't understand what it means.
So yeah, exactly. And philosophy really is the if you look at the words come from philo and Sophie. Philo in Greek is the love of, and Sophie is knowledge or wisdom. So the word literally translates to the love of wisdom. And you have, these people who are philosophers specifically, who are coming about giving arguments, viewing the world, examining the world, and trying to understand it. And in reality, there's not a big difference between that and religion, because philosophers, the way they prove things is they'll look at the universe, they'll examine it without any Islamic text, without any Quran, without anything like that, and they'll come to conclusions about the world. And it's interesting because in Islam we do the same thing with Tawheed. Tawheed is purely, before it's Quranically based or anything, in Islam, it's mainly brain-based. You examine the universe, you examine all the arguments, and then from there you go forward and you start proving God. So they're much closer than people like to think, and I like to think they also complement each other. I mean, if you have religion without any faith, religion without any rationality, that's not really religion. That's just a cultural belief that you might hold. I mean, if I want to believe that tooth fairies exist, I can believe that, but there's no rational evidence or empirical evidence to prove that tooth fairies actually exist.
Yeah.
So if I want to get to that belief, I have to rationalize it. And I feel like they balance each other out. But I think if you're a person who's open and you're okay with people having their own thoughts, different thoughts, then you come with an open heart and say, I want to discuss with you, and you can discuss with me, and we can share ideas. We might not have to agree, but we come to some nice conclusions about life, and you typically do.
And so when we come to this whole point of the kind of deeper looking at essentially philosophy is finding also the answer to meanings of life, and sometimes these concepts become so big and so grand that the everyday youth, or for example me on a daily basis, I can't think, how would this come into place with me, and especially me going on a journey where I'm supposed to be in my religion, journeying towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala.
Yes.
So how do I bring understanding, and what benefits does understanding bring in this journey to Allah?
Well, I think when it comes to this journey and bringing understanding, and specifically with regards to philosophy and these different forms, there is no one answer in that this is your understanding of life. I mean, people do try to tell you, well, this is definitely a noble goal. This is a value that's noble. Live to love and be kind and to help others and to hold on to religion. And that, I think everybody kind of lives with these things. But when it comes to real understanding, it's what understanding you yourself bring. And the example I always give is, if I give a person religion, it does not mean that person is immediately an understanding person.
Yeah.
But it's what that person does with their religion and how he understands it. If I have an open mind, religion will be very open. And if I have a closed mind, religion will be very closed.
But what does religion want me to have? Does it want me to have an open mind or a closed mind? What does Islam want me to have?
Well, I mean, personally, for me, I really believe religion is meant to open your mind. Religion is meant to get you to see the world in a bigger series, to see the world in a much bigger class.
But don't those open doors sometimes lead us astray? Like sometimes those doors can lead to a point where you're completely off the path of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's why a lot of times we fear opening those doors.
Well, I'll tell you something. It's only through real skepticism and through real, as we can say, not a lack of faith, but when somebody really questions themselves and comes out of their own box till they really understand something. Aristotle's got a beautiful quote. He says it's a sign of a wise man to be able to contemplate the opposite thought without accepting it. And what that's really saying is, yes, you have a lifestyle, but unless you come out of your box and say, you know what are the opposite ideas out there, you will never have conviction within yourself.
But so you're saying, fair enough, Aristotle said this. A lot of the time the argument comes, well, this thought of understanding and looking at different schools of thought and actually looking at the different beliefs which are out there is not from the Ummah. What would you say to that? Because we have the one truth. What was their nature?
Well, that's interesting that you say that. If you examine the schools of Imam Ja'far al-Sadiq, Imam Ali alayhi salam, let's take the classic example, which is the Messenger of Allah Muhammad. If you examine that, if you look at that example purely from his perspective, that example is a completely open example of to what a reality of religion is meant to be.
And which is?
And I'll tell you what it is. If you look at the earliest text of the Prophet, the earliest text, one of the earliest hadiths that he gave to the Arabians was 1 hour of contemplation is better than 1,000 years of ibadah. To some he said 70, to some he said 1,000, because he realized how important that contemplation is for them. And what he's trying to say there is, before he said anything, before he told them to fast and pray and to give zakah and to wear hijab, his immediate thing was, oh people, just contemplate about your life. Be skeptical. Start asking questions. Because he realized he needed to awaken that skepticism that was inside the people. Do you see where I'm going with this?
I guess if you're not skeptical, then you're always going to be content with where you're at in your life as well.
Yes.
Because you're looking at yourself and you're saying, well, actually, over here right now, I'm perfectly fine. I don't need no one else. I don't need another entity to come into my life. But if I'm always skeptical, I'm always even questioning myself before anything else, then that will also bring me towards...
You know, I'll tell you something just on that point. I believe the truth is sacred.
Okay.
And the truth is meant to be respected. If I believe Islam is the truth, as a logical conclusion, I will not just immediately accept what I'm told. But if I have respect for something, then I will totally understand it before I accept it. And I think that's part of having respect for the truth, because the truth is, how much sanctity is in truth? How many times does Allah say al-haq in the Quran? It has a lot of sanctity. And if I'm going to establish something as true, I must be willing to delve into it. Be skeptical about it so that I may understand it, and then I can accept it as truth and say, you know what? I have respected the truth. I have now understood it. I accept it. I work and move with it. That does not mean you don't have to act upon it and submit to it. No. But you slowly understand it and you try to move forward with it. And
there's another element to this. This is about contemplation, because you mentioned it just now about contemplation, as the Prophet emphasized with contemplation. But how can I could barely get the time to sleep right now, university, work, and then your studies, and then you come back from university, and then you go into, especially in these days, we're going to majalis, and it's very much packed, and the life of especially a British Muslim youth is overwhelming. Let alone he can fit in his salah, just 1 hour of contemplation. Where am I going to find the time? So what are the practical ways? How can we implement this hadith practically?
Well, I'll tell you something. I mean, I always think about that in the sense that the way our lives work, especially as students graduating now, it's crazy. I mean, if you look at students in America, Noam Chomsky's got a quite powerful discussion about how America, for example, is creating drones, which are drones that go to school. They come up with maybe $100,000, $200,000, $300,000 worth of debt. They start working 9-to-5 jobs. They get a family, and they just simply live to pay their student debts. If they don't pay them, then they die with those. And it's really creating drones, not actual thinking minds.
There's a really interesting TED talk on that as well. And it basically says that children are made from even the primary years. We put them into a production line. You know, because everything was made in the industrialized era. So industrialization was a forte. So we had to make children in a production line. So we go through school, year 1, year 2, year 3, year 4, until you graduate. And
it's funny. It's funny you say that. I mean, I also see this sometimes with people who teach their kids religion. It's always, son, let me tell you how it is. This is haram and this is halal, and that's all you need to know.
God is someone who you first fear when you're a child, and then he becomes loving, and then you fear him again. And he's like, I sometimes think back and I think don't do this because Allah is going to be really displeased with you, and God is that figure for you.
It's funny because sometimes kids really take it literally. I mean, I have situations where a kid will say to me, well, I'm doing something good, I'm getting 10 good deeds, I'm doing something bad, I'm getting -1, and therefore I'm balancing myself out. Religion has become so literal, it's such a mechanical system. But back to your original question, with regards to practical steps, I'll tell you how it started with me. I had a period in my life where obviously I was in high school. I think you guys call it secondary school in the UK. And then I got into university. So I realized at a young age that if I wanted to get any sort of certainty in my life and to better myself, I'm going to have to start sacrificing some of my time that I have. Specifically with regards to, I go to university, I give that its time. But if I want to die with any form of confidence in what I have, I need to somehow be skeptical and read about the things that I have in my life. I mean, how long do I go into realizing that these things aren't important? They are important. The answers to questions such as, why do I exist? Why am I here? Lurk in everyone's mind. We always think about them on our car rides back home when we're just sitting alone and there's nobody with us. We always think about, why is there something here? Why am I here? Why me? Why am I in my body? Who am I? I mean, does everything exist? All these questions come up. Most people just shove them to the back of their minds. And there are answers to these things. There are actual answers. And if you delve deep enough, you will find something that suits you. And it just opens your mind so much. The results are profound. You get so much out of life that way. And for me, I'm just so grateful to be able to see life in a different light.
So growing up in the States as well, in your personal journey, how important was faith to you back then, and
Sure.
how has it shaped your identity?
Sure. So my story is kind of, it's my family. I come from a very conservative Muslim family, kind of just like everyone else. I was born and bred in the city of Qadmain in Iraq. Even though my last name is Najaf, I'm not. That's the big joke. Like, your name is Ali Najaf, but you're not really from Najaf. So even though I'm not from the city of Najaf, I was born in the city of Qadmain. And then I moved to Lebanon, and I lived there for about 5 years. So ever since I was younger, the idea of Islam, Imam Hussein, religion has always been a part of my identity and my personality, and I didn't understand what it was. So as I was growing older, my mother specifically would push me to recite things, to go on the minbar, and to do matam, for example. At that point, Imam Hussein in my life was me becoming popular among the religious kids who were with me. Imam Hussein got me to be popular. I kind of understood what he was. His principles were nice. But to me, he was a superhero whom I fantasized about and really was like, wow, this guy was, it was a Superman to me. He was my childhood Superman.
Yeah.
When I got into my teenage years and I started meeting different people, specifically people who challenged my world of Imam Hussein, I started getting confused. What is this Hussein about? What is his understanding? And as I got even older and I became more skeptical, I started seeing Imam Hussein in a whole new light. Imam Hussein to me wasn't just a man who had died, for example, in Karbala, but to me he was something much greater. He symbolized humanity for me. He symbolized a whole movement, a revolution for me. So religion, throughout the parts of my life, has taken different roles. At one role, it took a imposed reality, where religion to me was a imposed lifestyle that I had to do because my parents made me do it. And it took a turn when I started realizing I don't want to do things because people make me do them. I am who I am. I am a free human being, and no one can ever force me to do anything. I mean, for God's sakes, the best thing I can do to myself is be honest with myself. For how long will I tell myself, no, I believe this, even though I have doubts within me?
So you went about to remove those doubts. What was that journey?
So I turned to many different areas. So I turned to scholars, I turned to books, but I find what helped me most was conversation with ordinary people. Just sitting with people who had a different mindset than me and just discussing with them. I remember at one point I was in Miami and I had a young man, a very close friend of mine, who was in Miami with me. At the point he wasn't believing in God, and I remember me and him would stay till 2, 3 in the morning and just discuss, go back and forth, back and forth. Even though I would argue with him and debate with him, I would go home thinking to myself, wow, this guy, there are some points that he brings up about religion that I have to go research. Or some points about God that I don't understand, I have to go research. I also had one of my close friends from Dearborn who would always, we and him would always sit and have late night discussions. My wife obviously me and her is a big part of my life, where we sit together and we just discuss a lot of these philosophical issues because it's a journey.
So that conversation doesn't tend to happen now. You come back from a majlis, but now I'm starting to see certain trends starting in some of my friends. Like, they come back and they'll discuss what the lecturer is saying, and it's nice to hear them say, well, I didn't really understand this point. Because before it was a sign of weakness, you know, like it was a sign of weakness that you don't understand. It was a sign of like, oh, and if you didn't agree, then you wouldn't approach the person right now. And why do you think it's important that we start having conversations about religion? Because many times if we don't converse about religion, we tend to converse about things which aren't meaningful.
Well, that's a good point you bring up. I mean, even if you look at Hausa studies, discussing the main points of religion, the most important points, which are aqa'id, is called ilmul kalam, the study of discussion, of talk. Why do they call it that? Why don't they call it the study of usul al-din? Because the Hausa institution realized the only way you can reach any form of conclusion on these issues is really by just sitting and having the conversation that you and I are having. Critically thinking about things with your classmates, people who you know, taking their doubt seriously, saying, well, you have that doubt. Let me be real to my humanity and say, I have that doubt too. What's the conclusion? I mean, we reached a level where I'd sit with some of my friends, we'd look at all the controversial verses in the Quran, and we'd sit for hours and try to justify why God must have said it this way. Why did he say it this way? What's this wife beating verse about? Does it apply to me? What's this hand cutting verse? Does it apply? Is this literal? Is this metaphorical? If I set up an Islamic state today, or if Imam Mahdi was to reappear, will you be able to work with this? What ISIS is doing in Iraq, which is also supposed to be Muslim, which is anything but Islam, is that if they're taking what's in the Quran literally, how do I justify this? So you see how all the questions come up. I'm not talking about questions of should I pray with my hands down or my hands folded. I'm not talking about questions when I put my head down, should I put my head on this side or this side? I'm not talking about should I stand this way or sit this way. I'm talking about questions that actually affect society and community. And those questions are good, the fiqh-based questions. We're talking about the whys of everything. Okay, so why is you can focus on the circle of what.
So what can, if for those viewers that are watching at home, what could they do? Like, for example, you've given the example that maybe just create like a small discussion circle.
Sure.
And probably gather up some verses from the Quran or some things which are always there deep down we can't really answer.
Yes.
We have various other things within the Shia Islam which sometimes youth don't really understand how to answer when the questions are posed towards them.
Sure.
So what can be the kind of, once you've got those verses, what do you do next?
Well, let me say something before the verses, and that is, firstly, and most important of all, is you awaken your humanity that's within you. That voice inside of you that's saying to you, this doesn't make sense to me. Bring that forth and let it sit there so that you can actually start tackling the questions. I don't mean let it sit there and just put it aside and say, oh, I don't believe anything, I'll just put it aside. No, you have to answer those questions. So bring that voice forward, that skepticism, bring it forward. What I would do is sit with some friends, some people who I know, sit with a local scholar, sit with people who might have knowledge in these things. Pick your favorite Maulana, for example. Call him up, have him on speaker, or sit just amongst you and your friends. It doesn't really have to be, a scholar does not have to always be there for you. And read these and discuss them. What do you think of this? How are you a philosophy major? How does this fit within your world? Are you an economics major? How does this verse sit with you? If we started a political system, would this work? Just ideas and things that people understand. And I don't mean this has to be formal. This can be informal. I mean, we would sit for hours, laughing and talking, and then we pull up something serious and talk about it. This is just a group of friends. I think anyone can do that. Anyone can come together and say, but it's just thinking about the topics, bringing them up, not just embracing religion. Religion is not just a cultural dogma. Religion is not just something that was given to us 1400 years ago. We simply take it, put it in our back pockets, and that's it.
Well, we're talking about journeys, and now we're in the days when we're remembering the martyrdom of Imam Hussein, and it's coming to an end as well. In these days of Arba'in, and we're marking the 40th. What is it from that journey which we as the youth can take? Just a quick element from that.
So I'll specifically about that journey, something that really was profound to me, and it's a strong humanitarian aspect. When I was in Iraq, I saw a grand amount of poverty. There's so much poverty. And those who take the walk, and I think every youth should take the walk, because I really think it's life-changing.
Really?
I really...
Yeah, I done it 2 years ago, and it really
it just opens your horizon. I mean, you've got poor people who are like putting their whole life savings in these sheds where they feed you. Or they're putting, for example, half their life savings. But obviously these are poor people. And the amount of giving that people give, even though they are poor, is phenomenal. And that got me thinking, well, I come from a society which is completely capitalistic. And it's all about materialism and how much I can shovel down in as little as possible, and as much time, in as little time as possible, and as much quantity as possible. And I thought, these people have nothing and they're giving so much. I come from a place where if you have nothing, you don't give. And if you have a lot, you also don't give, because there's an extreme amount of stinginess. But this walk, and Imam Hussein has inspired the masses in such a way where even the poor give. You've got elders who serve. It kind of humbles everyone, brings them down. And I think if such a system was applied elsewhere, that would be phenomenal. That would change the world. I mean, that would get rid of poverty, for goodness sakes. I mean, just look at the way the world works. We spend more on wars than we spend on treating, treating people who might be hungry, and giving them food. We spend more on ourselves and our PlayStations and our video games, etc., the way we dress, the way we look, trying to impress people who we might not even care about, simply because it makes us feel better. And this lesson to me was priceless. So for me, I take a humanitarian lesson out of it. Because I believe...
Even from that phenomenon itself,
yeah,
the phenomenon of remembrance, we can derive so many lessons.
Exactly. I mean, for me, just remembering Imam Hussein, when I think Hussein, I don't think Hussein from a religious perspective. When I think Hussein, even though religious perspective is there, I think of a phenomenal man who lived at one point, who was such a revolutionary, that I can't but accept him. I have no choice. I mean, whenever you flip the books of history, you read about great men. You're like, wow, this is a great man. And Imam Hussein is one of those men, regardless if he was religious or not. Regardless of any of these things, which obviously we know that he was, on a top level, he was a humanitarian.
And we'll definitely explore that element, inshallah, next time on the show. And join us again when we'll be discussing more of these pertinent issues. And make sure you tell us what you're thinking at home. What do you think is the main issues for young people growing up here within the West? But most importantly, what kind of journeys are you on, and what things do you need help on? We would love to hear from you. The information on how to get in touch with us is below. And from me and Brother Ali Najaf, we bid you farewell. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.